friends. Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm said Forest of the East. I'm coming to you from the southern Utah high desert. Been down here all month, which has been really amazing. Really amazing to be back in this rarefied air. I'm actually going back in a couple days. Got to get back into the groove and heading to New York City, of all places, in mid-June to do, unfortunately not for a performance, but to do some video and photo stuff with a friend of mine. And we're going to do a live version of some of the tracks from Possible and shoot that on video with a string section that I'm super excited about. So the studio's out there that we're doing it at, and I have a lot of friends in New York because I used to live there for almost did 10 years in New York, which I feel like if you do 10 years, they're supposed to give you the key to the city. Like there's this expectation that if you suffered that long in New York City, that like the mayor, or at least like, you know, really high up intern in the mayor's office will buzz your building and show up with some sort of golden key. You know, maybe it's a golden key of chocolate, but at least then, you know, you still have something you could take the wrapper and hang it up on the wall. And I kind of feel like if you put in 10 years in New York, you should have special privileges, or maybe they give you some kind of like black credit card that gets you into like secret underground layers and transportation tunnels that have less of a smell in the summer and are properly air conditioned or something like that. But alas, I think I left New York in 2010, and it was just shy of 10 years. So I didn't get it. I didn't get my key to the city. So when I go back this time, I will be just like all the other bourgeois, riding the subway and walking the streets. But there is something special about New York in the summer. The smell of piss and garbage and hipsters on the water lines. No, seriously, I am looking forward to that. It's a great place to be. In a lot of ways, I probably said this on the podcast before, but it feels like if everyone had a civil service duty to spend 2 years in New York City when they turn 18 or sometime in your 20s, and the only requirement is we don't give you dick and you just have to make it work and figure it out, I think that'd do a lot for people and this planet because it's such an international city. It humbles you, and you just kind of figure out a lot of like what makes you tick and what doesn't because it's such an intense place. But that's happening soon. And right now, though, I am in the spoils of raw nature, and this is this place that has calmed down my nervous system over the many years now as I progressively have moved down these different steps from New York City to Portland to Boise and to southern Utah. So that's why it's hard to think about going back. I certainly would have a hard time living there, but fun place to visit. This week, I have a conversation with my dear, dear beloved Radha. So we're doing a Radha Krishna Roundtable, which is always fun. And we thought it'd be cool because we both just participated in the Entheo Wheel. I guess it was a conference, not really a retreat, but you know, you get the jive. At Esalen in Big Sur, California, a couple weeks back. That was really cool. And this one was focused around psilocybin, and they had some virtual speakers and real world speakers. So both of us were there performing, teaching, speaking, as it were. And Paul Stamets and James Fadiman, Jyoti Ma, some other indigenous grandmothers and elders had a prominent role. And we just dug into the role of ceremony, preparation, integration, the current science going around, all things psilocybin. There are about 30-ish people there because of COVID protocols in the actual space. And then they also had a virtual space where people could watch it as a live stream. And then I believe it's going to become a kind of e-course that you could essentially watch at any point. So I'm sure they'll get that done in the future. And we actually filmed lots of extra content, like Q&A, some little performance stuff, some live meditations, some embodied, there was breath work, I believe. So lots of things. So that should be cool in the future. And I'll keep you updated whenever that gets released. Theoretically, they're going to do 7 more. So there were 8 total Entheo wheels, as it were, each one being a different medicine. So I think, So we kind of wanted to debrief our experience there, why it was fresh in our head. And the event was organized by Dream Mullick, and hats off to her because, man, that is not easy putting something like that together at Esalen, and also just, what's going on these days, which is crazy. Hey, just wanted to say thanks to everyone who's reviewed the podcast, everyone who has shared it and who's part of our community. A special thank you to everyone as part of the East Forest Council, which is on Patreon. That's an exclusive little thing we do, patreon.com/eastforest, where not only do we do things like share, music that's unreleased or share music in advance. I also put extras from this podcast or things that aren't publicly released for the podcast up there in the Patreon. And we have a monthly Zoom council. So we have one actually coming up this coming weekend at the end of May 2021. We do it once a month currently. So if you want to jump in, you can still be a part of that. You can check it out, patreon.com/eastforest. And that's a great way to support this podcast, even at the lowest tier right now, $4 a month, if that's how you'd like to say thanks for the pod. Undying is the latest single from the Possible album that is now out anywhere you listen to music. I love that track. I love the string section. That was the 208 ensemble, which is part of the Boise Philharmonic. So we recorded them like 3 times, 3 different parts, arrangements by Lorna Doone, and then the piano, of course, underneath that. And actually, Owen Hoffman-Smith plays the contrabass as well, and that low bass note, like when the chorus really hits, there's this beautiful, rich bass that comes in. And I'm proud of that. We're working on a video, so we'll have a video for that song later, and also working on a live version, as I said, that we're going to be doing in New York in mid-June. I just want to give a quick shout-out to say thanks to a couple of the podcast reviews that came in on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for the 5 stars to Louise. You got some emojis that are unpronounceable. One's a butterfly, and one's sort of this atomic thing. You say, "You can't fall out of love. The suffering is not giving in. These words have come over my spirit over and over again as I am healing from spinal surgery and sometimes get scared. I've felt so much comfort through this podcast, meditations, and music through these times." Well, thanks, Louise. I appreciate the review. Even if you can't give a written review, just the 5 stars always helps. It helps, like, people who I invite on the podcast maybe say yes when we have more of you guys saying you enjoy the show. Also, just a quick note that we have some new garments in the shop. We haven't had clothing in a long time. I won't bore you for the reasons why, but these are really cool. We've got a women's tank and this beautiful sweatshirt that is someone else for the Unlearn podcast, Cal Callahan, sent me one of these sweatshirts that he made for his podcast, actually. And I so fell in love with the actual sweatshirt. I was like, this is so comfortable and like fitted and cool looking. I made some East Forest sweatshirts. We've never made a sweatshirt before. This one has the Ouroboros artwork from the Possible album on it, which is this super cool design by Evan Lawrenson. His Instagram is Art and Such Evan. Really cool illustrator. Anyway, you can get those now while supplies last. Just head over to eastforest.org, click on the shop button, and you'll see what those look like, and I think you'll enjoy them. The women's tanks are really cool too, like really flowy in a light fabric, has the same design on it, and check it out. Other than that, I've been working on more music in the background. Been talking to Anna about doing some more collaborative tracks that are super fun. They kind of feel like a mix between sort of like Caribou and Chiasmos and other fun things. So I was like, oh, let's do more. And of course, the Cloud Chord Slowly collaboration is out, and I hope you guys are enjoying that as well. That was really fun to do something more lyrical and super slow jam. Okay, well, let's get into this conversation with Marissa Radha Wepner on the Radha Krishna Roundtable. So, we're back from the Esalen Institute of the Big Sur of California, and I thought we could use it as an opportunity for a Radha Krishna Roundtable. I'll try to get this out in a timely manner. And it also to kind of use it as an opportunity coming out of COVID and having that kind of gathering of various people in mind to look at the state of the psychedelic landscape and emergence and sort of where the edges are with that and so forth.
And so on. And so it is.
So that being said, let's just start with what were some things that you thought were like overarching themes if you were to connect the dots from the different people you met, who was speaking, your own experience, what they're trying to make, and how that aligns with where this is all going.
Ask me like 5 more questions to answer in one go, and then I'll start.
That's too many.
No, I'm just kidding. I'll overarching themes.
Yeah, like
I would say
takeaways.
Yeah. I certainly felt like a theme was diversity, inclusivity, the weaving of ancient traditions and modern science, giving indigenous voices a seat at the table, and really, really honoring and uplifting their place in the role of psychedelics. And so that was awesome to see. I would think, besides the times that I've experienced ceremony with indigenous leaders, I don't think I've been at a talk that included indigenous elders.
I was thinking back on this. I just want to note it was called the Entheo Wheel.
Yes.
And Dream put that together. What was the longer name? Entheo Wheel.
The Ceremony and Science of Psilocybin. So it was around mushrooms.
And in theory, she's going to put on 7 more of these. There's 8 aspects to the wheel, and each one is a different medicine. So I was thinking back on this, and I was remembering the Eclipse Festival.
Oh, yeah.
And they had that huge, they had a whole village, let's call it, on the other side of the lake that was indigenous in their space. And then during the actual...
Well, Symbiosis, to their credit, which put on the Eclipse Festival, they've always had an indigenous camp. Always. At all of their events that I've been when they used to be in California, they always had that there. They always started with land blessings. They had altars everywhere. And they were a festival that I would go to that put the most intentionality I would see into including the indigenous voices.
Right. And if I remember correctly, it was some local indigenous tribes being represented, but also a lot of global stuff because the actual eclipse ceremony thing, I remember it being almost entirely various indigenous voices doing ceremonial, ritualistic
in the
songs
center.
and acts. That was mostly all of it.
Yeah, it was.
It's like an hour of
of prayer and ceremony and calling in and
and so I thought back to that, and I thought like in some ways, a few years back, in some ways the festival consciousness, festival space was one of the first places that was getting the heat for like people, wearing headdresses and be like, yo, this is not okay. And this is becoming a part of the culture. And it was sort of on some, as far as I know, some festivals, it was addressed like at Burning Man. It was like, hey, this is not okay.
Yeah, we're
going to draw some lines here.
It became a costume. I actually saw that when I was at Bonnaroo teaching in 2018. There was a young Caucasian girl, early 20s, wearing like the full chief headdress, and I literally inside was like, "Oh my gosh!"
Now it feels even like extremely unthinkable, and not that I never thought this, but my point is, I was thinking back to 2012 and connecting a dot to how now in the psychedelic movement, as we came through racial justice, social justice movements that emerged during the pandemic, and how that's intersecting with this idea of access. And so I agree that what we were seeing at this conference, the idea of how does the psychedelic revolution, and especially the medical and scientific angle of it and the therapeutic angle, become available to all. And that's not just a question of how do you make it affordable, but also how do you bring it and have it be spoken through groups and communities in their language from them, as opposed to like just it's being offered. And I don't think there is a clear answer to that right now, but I felt like that is the leading edge of where things are at in the movement. Besides, because
And we talked about that a lot through the weekend, I felt.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. So I don't know. Anything that you feel like we could translate for people who weren't there?
Well, let's see. I would say, I mean, there's two sides to this coin. One is that a lot of the plant medicines, including psilocybin, have histories in indigenous cultures of the Americas, as they're now called. And like Paul Stamets pointed out, psilocybin mushrooms, there's 117, I think he said, different strains, and they're found actually all over the globe.
Everywhere.
They're found everywhere on every continent. And so it's not, psilocybin in particular isn't limited to just a plant medicine of the Americas. So it's a both and, right? And then there's even the book, The Immortality Key, that links these types of, I think he's talking more about ergot, but just like even in the birth of Christianity, which we often think of as a Caucasian religion or European religion in a way, has its roots in psychedelics. And so this part that wants to maybe say, well, it's mine, it's really in some ways all of ours. And at the same time, if we're doing it in a way that does include ceremony, for you and I, as Americans in modern culture, we don't have our own roots of ceremony. And so then we often are borrowing from the indigenous cultures around us and from the place in which we now reside. So it is a blending. And Erica, who was a leader, an elder that was there, she said there's a difference between appropriation and appreciation. And that's the distinction, I think. And I feel like you can use elements of what might be seen or felt as an indigenous ceremony if you are honoring its roots and doing it from a place of appreciation for the technology that it is. You're not claiming like, this is me and my channel and what I do and I'm owning it. It's like more like, this is something I am borrowing and utilizing.
Yeah. And a recognition that whatever psychedelic renaissance we are in, it cannot not stand on the shoulders of that which preceded it, which well beyond the 60s, into thousands of years of various cultures working with these medicines, then there is a through line, even from Wasson, when we're talking about psilocybin in itself, of going down to Mexico and then translating that through Life magazine to the West. And even, I think, people like Terrence McKenna, there's a line. And so it's an acknowledgement when they say, we'd like to be involved in this conversation and be invited into the conversation. It's to say that, I guess that would be a form of appreciation, but also one of listening and trying to say, I don't know. We don't know everything. I mean, there's a lot going on, and yes, that's the spirit tip they're at. And all this stuff is emerging in the space of commerce and psychedelics at the same time, more so than before. And how does that relate? How do we have this conversation? And I think that's what's emerging. And in it, I could sense, as there is in this movement outside of psychedelics, there's hurt, and there's anger, and there's sort of a finger wagging about like, don't it's sort of like inherently has these problems built into it. And one thing that's interesting about the psychedelic energy that's happening now is, for most people, this is another conversation we have with someone else there, their heart's in the right place. Like, they've usually had some kind of heart opening or really expanding consciousness experience, and they really do want to like expand that into the world and to others. And at the same time, it gets murky into, but we can start a business and actually also potentially make a lot of money at this. And that is a slippery situation. It absolutely is. But I don't feel like it's an either or. for people. Like I really feel like they're swimming in waters where they
Well,
get
in
lost
some
and found.
ways, if someone wants to, like you're saying, they have an awakening and they feel oneness and love and they want to spread that, why then does that have to separate from them then moving forward with that mission and bringing it out into the world? Though it might become then commodified. You can, at least you would want those who are commodifying it to do it with integrity and from their own felt experience. So that's holding the values and mission of what they're really hoping to do versus I'm going to cash in on this.
And that is another fear that I heard in certain circles
Of what?
that the integrity can become lost, and that money becomes the play, or big tech coming into it's about harvesting data.
It's surely a seduction, right? When lots of money comes into the field,
Yeah.
it's very tempting. And so maybe I don't have a solution for that, but I agree with you that it doesn't make sense to be in an either or space.
Well, you look at the ayahuasca landscape and how that rose up in the last, let's say, 10 years. And I kind of see it as sort of the human story. Then what would you rather have? That we didn't have the ayahuasca revolution where all these people are traveling down to the Amazon to experience ayahuasca. And then in turn, there are bad actors at play where there are charlatans, there's sexual assault at times. This is the minority, I would assume. And there's this sort of extractive energy of the Westerners going down and screwing up cultures and all the money that's involved. But on the other hand, if that didn't happen, there's also a lot of genuine work going on, really difficult transformation and psychospiritual work going on by people. It kind of is like once we get into the weeds and we really start tilling the soil, there's worms in there, but there's also a lot of nutrients.
Well, everyone comes at it from their level of psychic maturity, right? And just because you're an adult, like in Bill Plotkin's work, doesn't mean you're actually an adult. And so there are some folks that are quite powerful and of age, and internally, they still have a lot of work to do and a lot of shadow. And so how you show up in the world, I think, is the main indicator, really. And yeah, when you get into it, it's going to be all across the spectrum from those that are, for lack of a better term, really pure to those that aren't. And we all have our faults, and we all have our shadow sides and the things that might be more inflated in our egos or more shadow or less known. And so, yeah, it's the cutting edge where you're dealing with like heart, soul, consciousness, the past, the future, and it's through the vehicle of an individual's life. It's so varied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the point I was trying to make is that it's sort of an inevitable process, that it is messy.
Yeah.
Revolution and unveiling is going to, I kind of feel like every time someone says any of these ideas, I'm kind of like, yes, and it's going to be, probably that'll be part of it too.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of like keeping a sharpness of an eye, trying to look at all of that, but I'm not trying to get too concerned that like one of these areas is maybe going to take over the movement. An analogy might be like with cannabis. There's this thought that like, well, Philip Morris or whatever the McDonald's of weed will just dominate, take over, and that will be our whole for food source. But nonetheless, we still have all sorts of smaller growers, and some people prefer organic foods, some people prefer to shop at Safeway, and for different reasons. And I think it's going to just be a lot of things out there, and not all of them are going to be good. And that's why I'm really interested in the tools and the information that we can provide for people, because it's going to be happening.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of the spiritual revolution of the 60s, 70s, 80s, of all of the influx and flood of teachers and guides and gurus and sadhus and saints from India into America or into Western Europe, right? And those also individuals had varying levels of intention. and varying levels of
Right.
integrity with how they were able to deal with a huge increase in power and where that abuse of power came to lie or not. And though some of those Indian spiritual teachers, like Osho, for example, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, his teachings are amazing. His books are like constantly referenced in the yogic fields. They're like super deep transmissions. And then as a human, he had many foibles. Foibles?
Foibles.
Foibles.
Why does he need 25 Rolls Royces? You know,
Right.
it's
And so that's
strange.
the dichotomy, right? And so the same thing is kind of, it can and is happening in the psychedelic world. It's no different because we are human and we can at the same time hold a deep connection to wisdom and the divine.
Yeah,
and truth.
That's the essence of what makes it so strange and beautiful and weird to be a human being. You're an animal,
Yes.
and you can have agape consciousness.
So I kind of watch it and hold it with that same similar mindset of the teachers and the saints and the sadhus from the Indian tradition. And some did a better job than others at navigating. Because if you think of it, it's a clash of cultures there too, where they were coming out of their culture in India and then merging with the West. And I'm sure they're just, it creates a new blend, and we don't know how to do that. We're doing it as we do it.
And something so mysterious as psychedelics and plant medicines. I mean, we were specifically talking about psilocybin, magic mushrooms at this conference. And you've got people on one hand who really see it almost with religious fervor of like the mindset, the consciousness of the mycelial entity speaking to us and through us. I'm not saying this with any judgment. I'm just, there's that energy. And then there's more of the medical model of like, well, this is a chemical and now we're going to be able to use it. And let's find out what kind of reactions it does with our body and our brain that might be useful to us creatively or physically or emotionally. And there was also at this event kind of a weaving of these ideas.
Yeah.
And I know people are in different camps of comfort level with that. Like they may or may not identify with the mushrooms as an entity that is like helping the planet in this sort of conscious, embodied way.
Until they take them.
You're right. Exactly. Until you're like totally humbled and floored.
Yeah.
And like, I bow down to whatever this is. I am not worthy. Yeah, until you take them. And they also said at this event many times, we will not be taking medicine, not like, please don't, like it is not happening. And there was a journey night, it was called Simulated Journey, which involved breath work. And and you and I think we're both thinking like, I mean, that's a journey. It's not really simulated. You're doing breath work.
But they didn't actually do breath work that night. They did it the next night. Okay.
I thought, oh yeah. Regardless, it seemed like there was sort of, I understand the level of caution. It's like.
But I think you were getting at like breath work's really intense, or it can be.
Well, really, and then a journey isn't always just about imbibing psychedelic.
Well, I think their main point was, no, we're not going to dose you all with mushrooms.
No, and also you're in California. It's like a lot of people travel with their own medicine pouch and do what they do, whether they're there or not. And it's sort of like this idea of freedom of consciousness is really what it's all about anyway. And they're not the ones saying we're condoning it or breaking any laws, but it's also sort of strange then to be pointing a finger at people and saying, we're going to remind you, and you're not going to do that. And you're not. It's like, it's not their responsibility.
It's not the host's responsibility to say that?
It is their responsibility to define the space, absolutely, and like what they're able to hold and like the expectations of that space. But I just thought it was interesting that there was sort of not just like a line saying like, this is ours and that's yours. It sort of went over into being actively saying no. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't think within me it brings up the same thing within you, where I'm hearing maybe more resistance against that. I see it as like, you just got to cover your ass. You got to say the thing. It's like the waiver, Don't sue me, please. Everybody sign the waiver.
I get it. Maybe it was the term simulated journey. I was just trying to wrap my head around that. And it felt like a kind of distancing. And I was like,
Because it said simulated.
yeah, I was like, it's not, there's nothing wrong with, you know,
I think again, it was trying to have the clarity of point of like, hey guys, what we're going to do tonight isn't take mushrooms. This
Right.
isn't going to be a mushroom journey.
well, that's true.
But we can maybe simulate it the best of our
Yeah.
ability. And so Chil, who was helping to guide that night, she kind of walked us through the ceremony practices of her tradition, what they would be doing if they were imbibing.
Mm-hmm.
We would be doing this now and then now this, though we weren't.
And it was cool to say we can work with the medicine without putting it in our body. You can invite that energy in, and that's absolutely. I find that to be
And
100%
she
true.
did that so chill during that process, and I had a really deep, awesome, amazing connection with the mushrooms through her guided meditation, totally sober, that I wasn't anticipating at all.
You want to share about that, or?
Yeah, I mean, she essentially, it was like a guided meditation, like go inside, you see a cave, you enter the cave, you see a light, you go to the light, and the light is entity. And what does that say or speak or reveal to you? And I had a vision of mushrooms, almost like a tall, skinny of mushroom, I guess like a psilocybin mushroom, because it had a long stem, and it felt masculine energy. And it started saying, kind of like singing or chanting, you are one. You are one of us. And I loved the distinction of you are one, because it meant, my interpretation was one, like oneness, like you're everything. And you're also very unique and special. Like you're a one, like you're you. And isn't that beautiful? And you are you in your way, and you're also included. It's not that you're separate. You're part of this family. You're part of this community. You're part of this collective. We're in this together. So it was like a paradox of like, you're unique and you're unified. And it also had this like energy of like the mother, like mother to child, where a mother holding its infant in its arms is like gazing down at it, and it's the most special thing in the whole entire world. Like there's nothing more important than this little baby. Every child wants to feel that. I know I did. And then in that, you're part of a family. And so it was just beautiful. For me, it was really healing to feel that, feeling seen in that way and feeling welcomed in that way. Yeah.
It reminds me of the last solo cast I did, because I was talking about the song Can't Fall Out of Love. And it was, if you just kind of think about it through the lens of how people come out of people who come out of people, it's the only way. Every human being has come out of a mother. However you want to look at it, that is true. We all come out of the feminine, the great mother. And as above, so below, if we just want to take that model of thinking, all of this has come out of the great mother. And I had during that journey that feeling of, that is what that you can't fall out of love is the great mother, that there's no way not to have come out of the thing. You were inside the source. And there's that energy of like always right at the last minute, perhaps in the way that's perfect for you, to hold your hand, to grab you out and say, it's just enough.
Yeah.
And that's a feeling I've had on different psychedelics in different ways. And it's not always so black and white. I mean, it is and it isn't, but it's not just as obvious, like it's always that way, because there's always the very strong other energy of chaos, destruction, death, suffering. But it's like, sometimes if there's any kind of barrier or boundary, if you do fall through it, through a kind of death or letting go, I've often found on the other side is another layer of that plenum of existence, of love.
You're right. It does show up in different ways. I've had it show up as like like friends, in different psychedelic journeys, like just streams of friends who come through my consciousness, where it's like, there's always somebody who's going to be there for me. Period. And whether that's a somebody, it always is a somebody. It always manifests in material form somehow. And knowing that in my bones and my soul and my heart, wow, does that give me comfort and gratitude and the desire to be that for others. I want to be there for others.
It's the super varied, infinite ways, the manifestations of God, right? Of Maharajian drag, of the mushroom, however, all of them as forms of manifestations. Anything from a butterfly that passes by to a song that speaks to you in a moment. It's like it's all the whispers of the one, and I would say also the misery and the suffering. And that's why sometimes when we find ourselves in those places, it's usually not why you're in it, but there's sometimes can be a recollection of still seeing through the hard times the purpose and the divinity even in that. And that's hard for me to grok and hard for me to hold sometimes because it ain't fun, you know.
It's not fun, but when you're in those spaces, I at least am able to see the full spectrum. So it's those moments that might feel hard or even like gross or disgusting is on the continuous plane of what's also beautiful and blissful and luminous. There's no separation. And getting back even to like the analogy of the mother, when a mother has a child, through raising it, you know, they're giving them their breast milk, but they're also being shit on and changing diapers and being vomited on
They're
and
primates.
cried on
You're a primate.
and laughed with. And then, but the mother doesn't not love any of it. Like everything that the baby is doing is perfectly fine and acceptable. Do you know what I mean? So even like in the spectrum where we, then as we adult and separate out, those things become gross or undesirable to the mother. It's all neutral. It's all the same.
How does that play out for you in non-child things? You know, because when we come back and have transitions into kids and stuff, sometimes it's a rough landing. I mean, especially with Estlin, we're not too used to traveling and touring and any of this. Like a lot of us, we haven't been doing any of this, and so it feels harder and like a bigger trip in some ways, as it should. And you're at a place that's full of the ocean and expansiveness and the hot water and these interesting ideas. And then you come back into...
Yeah. And so I think you're speaking to the transition of how, like, when we get back, sometimes we were just in like bliss and now we're in daily life and maybe I'm grumpy or maybe I'm processing or maybe I'm not feeling as open as I was just the day before. And so for myself, when that's occurring, when I'm going through a state that feels less than elevated, I've witnessed myself in it, but I know it's not who I am. It's just something that's coming up or I'm processing through. There's a density or a heaviness, and I don't identify with it as myself, or because you can't always pinpoint the reason why either. And so I try not to really get stuck on psychoanalyzing myself of why is this coming up. It's just, I'm feeling off kilter right now. I'm feeling out of alignment. And part of my journey is to allow myself to feel that way while, to the degree that I can, actively work to come back into realignment and inflict as little damage as possible on those around me while I'm in that state.
Me?
And sometimes I'm better at it than others. But
Sure.
So I guess I'm saying that I hold it with acceptance.
Mm.
Just like a mother would accept, like, I got to change a diaper right now.
Well, what if it's the other person that feels like it's having... Can you accept that? And
can I accept another
with that lens of the motherly, like it's both at the same time?
Like, you know, for in our relationship together, me and you, there are definitely moments when I feel from you like a heaviness or a prickliness or like, ooh, ouchie. Like I get ouches from you. And let's say my feelings get hurt or whatever. My love for you doesn't go away. And I know that that's not your true truth, your essence. It's just something within you is out of alignment.
Does it go away for the moment and then come back? Or is it really like in that moment, you're still like, I love this guy?
I can hold both.
Really?
I hold both.
Amazing.
I hold both.
Right.
Of course. And I've grown in my capacity to be able to do that as I mature. And I think, on a meta level too, it's as my own ability to have self-love increases and less judgment of myself, or for even when I'm in those states, so also in equal proportion does my love and compassion for others also grow. They're same, they're equal, I find.
Mm-hmm.
And so does it feel good? No, it doesn't feel good, but that's okay. It's somehow also God. That I know to be true.
Yeah.
Even though I'm going to label it as not feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
That's a judgment I've placed on it. It's really just a feeling or a sensation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we took we personally, I don't think work with psilocybin all that much in our lives because, well, for myself, I only work with it in ceremonial fashion, meaning like I don't use it to go do things externally in the world or enhance other experiences. It just takes me inside. And furthermore, the more I've worked with it for all these over a decade, with other people and myself in that ceremonial space, even if I microdose with it, it just enlivens that feeling in me of that inner journey. It's really powerful. And we decided to work with it after it's been a long time.
A couple of years.
I think the last time was I wanted to witness the Music for Mushrooms album as part of that process. I needed to experience it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And this time it was your idea as to kind of prepare for this weekend in California. But for myself, I had the double need. I needed to, and I wanted to work with a new record I'm working on. It's essentially Music for Mushrooms Volume 2, coming out later this year. And so I had sort of a final mix. I was like, I really want to do exactly what I did before.
Yeah, what we did in Hawaii when we listened to Music for Mushrooms together and journeyed as a way to welcome and invite in that record and release.
Yeah. And what I did 13 years ago with my very first release of having a sort of an honoring and a celebration of the inspiration, which was largely from the psilocybin space itself.
So having the album in coincided with this weekend coming up, and I wanted to get in touch with the wisdom and energy consciousness of the mushrooms to be better prepared for it. So we journeyed together a couple weekends ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was really beautiful for myself. At first, it was sort of this. It did feel kind of celebratory of me witnessing the music and the medicine allowing me to step back and sort of see it and experience it in a different way. And that was just really a powerful and amazing experience. But as I got towards the end of it, as things do, and as real medicine and real work does, it ended up digging really, really deep for me psychologically and exercising some grief I had inside, and had a real cathartic, good cry.
Yeah,
kind of a wail.
sobby face.
Something deep had to come out there.
Oof,
right at the end too. It was crazy. And I was saying to you, it was crazy because at the end, the album has I talk an outro, so it's sort of like closing the ceremony. And it was me talking to myself is what was tripping me out so much. So it really felt like a different part of me talking to the part of me that was hurt and sad. And that was just like intense.
You were cracked wide open with grief. Do you want to share what that was about?
Well, some of it's so personal it almost wouldn't make sense with that like long backstory. But I guess it had a lot to do with it was my deep gratitude for everyone that has essentially been part of my journey, and how important and powerful and grateful I am for the roles they played. And that's anything from like my former manager to you, to my former wife, to my parents, to certain friends, to Lewis, to people who I'm working with now, like directly on my team, like all these different people, and like this really heartfelt, like, wow, like, pick any role someone played, some very small and some like yourself very large, and recognizing how important it is and how needed it was for me to do whatever it was I was doing and to get to the next place, the next thing. And in that gratitude was also so much grief, because I had a lot of shame that I think I needed to exercise about how I had kind of sullied some of those, or not fully embodied or expressed my appreciation, or even known it in some ways, and sort of seeing it. And that didn't feel good because it was almost too big, right? It was too much to hold and realize and witness. And to have it come through at this moment where it was kind of a part of me literally telling it to myself through the speakers, almost made it more strange and amazing at the same time, because it was just sort of like, there's all these ways that messages could come to you, but then it's like yourself telling it. And that's what happened 13 years ago with that first record. It was that first album. It was me essentially speaking to myself, helping me have these realizations and really physically transform into something through a process internally and energetically. And this felt like another kind of like that, like a physical exorcism of something to help me just go forward.
And if you were to say like the new doorway that you've walked through because of that, who is this new person?
I don't know. It's hard to put labels on these things.
How would you want this person to be?
Releasing shame and embodying that gratitude, because I have shame about it, and that's kind of what's holding me. That's what's holding me back.
Yeah, I think I remember you speaking to that, where it was like, I'm keeping myself from fully accepting myself and who I am right now. I'm holding myself
no one
back.
else is. It's my own internal limiters, and those are forms of guilt, shame, disbelief, whatever.
Yeah, and so I guess within the context of what we've been talking about is even like the pain and the difficulties are all God. Knowing that, does it make the shame a little less?
Yeah, because then we were processing for a while, and then I put on the Dark Thoughts song and Love Everybody, some Ram Dass music from the album. And then it hit me another level deeper, because it was like, it's not that I'm trying to get rid of those feelings, or that I have shame that I have those feelings, or even shame that there's a recognition that I'm not where, quote, I want to be internally. And I have more kind of healing that has to happen on a timeline I can't necessarily rush or want to. It's like a plant growing. And it was the recognition. It's like, that is what I'm loving, and that's so okay. And you can embody kind of the thing you think you're not at the same time.
Yes.
And that becomes the mystery itself. It's like, it's both. And that's exactly where you're supposed to be, and that's where people are, as opposed to me thinking like, I want to be somewhere and I'm holding myself back. I'm not there yet.
Yeah, you could flip it and you could say you already are there.
And I'm loving this healing process at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is a real trip.
Yeah. Yeah. And it gets again to what we were talking about earlier of just human nature, right? And the teachers and the gurus and the guides and the leaders, and that they have this beautiful intention and vision, and all of them have an interior space or spaces where it's not what they would maybe call their best self, but it's part of their self. And that's again, it's just love even that part of yourself.
And it's really, I guess it comes back to your integrity and your intention, because we all slip up and have these errors. It's just like, where are you coming from? Where's the source of this emanation of your intention? And we're all inherently going to have blind spots. And that's why they're called blind spots.
Yeah, well, Earth is a school. We're all actually students who are learning, and we don't know. And we're posturing like we do know. But we know a little bit.
I don't know. I'll put my hand up.
And then it changes. Yeah, me either. You know me, I love to not know in many ways. But that's the paradox too. And we forget like we forget that we're students, we forget that we're learning, and then we shame ourselves for making mistakes or...
Well, hubris and righteousness are probably the shackles that keep us from really breaking through, because you have to let these things go to say, like, I know the right way, or I've really got this. Or it's like, it's a difference between...
I've heard this before.
Difference between standing in your power and having beginner's mind. You can kind of have both at the same time, but when you get into this hubristic state of, knowing with a little K, but really with an exclamation point behind it, it's like, good luck with that. There's a lot of that going around this planet. But knowing with a capital K is one that always comes with humbleness.
Yeah. And then too, in the same side, like going into a plant medicine journey, there's a lot of ourselves that we consciously keep ourselves from recognizing. There's parts of our self that we maintain and strive to keep unconscious because they're, in some ways, we feel too painful to witness and feel. And so to go into a journey or an exercise or an experience with, like, I want to have revealed to me some things that I don't know about myself, or some things that are hard to integrate, that takes a lot of humility and courage.
Yes, and probably helpful to have some kind of structure and assistance. This comes into sort of the trauma work that you're exploring doing more of and doing in the ketamine therapy.
Yeah.
Because a lot of that is connected to traumas where let's honor the body and the mind for doing what it's trying to do, which is to protect you.
Yes,
by repressing
always.
these things. And so it's not doing that to be a piece of shit. It's doing it because, like, it thinks it needs to. Mm-hmm. And so when you get into this stuff and it's enlivening old traumas, you can do meaningful work to, I don't think release is the right word, but integrate and bring light to, and
diffuse.
So it's not something that's being repressed and then manifesting in probably negative forms either through your body or actions, your mind, and your life.
Yes.
And so you absolutely can do that. And in many ways at this conference, the Entheo Wheel, perhaps that's what it's really all about. And there's infinite traumas in this web of our history.
We all have them.
And it's all an exploration of how can we work through this so we can basically survive as a species. And this is one powerful tool we have in our toolkit among many, but this is a big one as far as people working with their own problems and issues and traumas from their own past in a more accelerated path so that we can then be of service and be connected, be more giving in the world. Mm-hmm. Part of that conversation, it's very diverse. How it would work with me and you, to how it would work with someone who has an indigenous lineage, to someone who's in the inner city, to someone who has no money, to someone who's never even heard about this stuff.
Well, I also think it can be worked with, to your points, in different ways. Like a lot of people that were there were like, I've done mushrooms, but I've never done it in a ceremonial way.
I hear that all the time.
Therefore, then you typically maybe have this kind of experience, right? And so then when you're using, it's like driving, like, I don't know, a Toyota Camry, and then you get into a Tesla, and it's got like all this other technology built into it that's you can now access within your own self and psyche and soul when you set up the experience in a different way. Does that make sense? Like the ceremony becomes like the Tesla.
It's an interesting analogy of all the cars. I'm a car guy, and it's like, wow, you pick the one that's like the most like technological and breaking through like the barriers of the auto industry. But that's just me overthinking it.
But you know what I'm saying? It's something.
Corolla's a very reliable car, though. I mean, that's another way you could look at it. It's like it's a very prudent choice.
It'll get you from here to there. But there's, or like when you play a video game, you can play a video game to get from start to finish, or you can play a video game and how many experiences did you have along the way and stuff that you brought in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see you saying the ceremony as a technology in a sense that can be used as a kind of tool as opposed to not having it, not using it.
And though conversely, when I was having my experience with you at the same time, one of the messages I was getting, and this isn't like a definitive statements, but it was what was true in the moment, was going into the ceremony. We can often have like the egoic part of the self that's like, well, I'm going to accomplish this, or I'm going to go into this space, or I'm going to use these breath tools or mindfulness tools or mantra or meditation tools in conjunction with the mushrooms so that I can unlock deeper states of self through a marriage of my own will and intention and the mushrooms and what's possible. Right? And then I started the journey and I was like, I just want to lie here and be a puddle. I can barely sit up and I'm surrendering myself to the mushrooms and wherever they're going to take me. Forget about what I thought I was going to do while I was on them.
Yeah. Yeah, you had some intense purging too, which there's one song in the album that is called, I don't know, the album's not finished, Slip Slope, because I always thought it had this energy of a slippery slope, like things starting to fall off the rails. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I was relating to you that there's an energy in the psilocybin space as you're moving upward in it, where it's sort of carnival-esque, and language and things are starting to break apart, and it's kind of a little chaotic and nutty. And there's a phrase, octopus spaghetti pants, that keeps coming up in my head in that moment, because it's a way of language even being absurd, and it's a representation of that space for me. Like, oh boy, here the octopus spaghetti pants land is blah blah blah, me, 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 me. And so we're debating calling that song Octopus Spaghetti Pants, but I thought it might be a bridge too far.
I vote in favor.
But during that song, the song came up, and the spirit was speaking through you, through the belly.
Yeah, I had a purge. I had a release then. It's like a huge wave that overtakes you. Again, I think in that moment is when I really surrendered to just like, even after that, physiologically, your body wants to like curl into a ball.
Yeah.
And then there's I don't know, this is my internal struggle of like fully surrendering into the direction, like curling into the ball and collapsing. And then to what degree am I supposed to resist and like push through into another direction? I don't have an answer for which one's better. But that journey felt like, just don't do anything. This isn't for you to do something to or with. This is for you to receive.
There's a flute in that song, and maybe it's some kind of energy that's transmitting through that flute that is about purging, catharsis, release.
What he's saying is, if you listen to that album, track 7, you're going to vomit.
Don't be driving.
I was using it the other night in a ketamine session, and I think it's track 10. That has water, and I'm like, oh man, this track's going to come on and everybody's going to have to go to the bathroom. This is like the pee track.
Oh boy. Well, all the songs were from live recordings of the ceremonies we did here during the pandemic live on YouTube. And so they were all full ceremonies for myself, but we had various recordings from them, and I thought it'd be fun to try to edit that into a connected journey. And that's what this album will be when it's done.
Excited for that.
Yeah. Shout out to Cash App Studios for being the progenitors of it and supporters. And I think we'll have more to say about that in the future. But thank you to them.
Yeah.
And Garrett.
And in that, with that, you were invited to the Entheo Wheel 2 perform a ceremony because you're the guy that plays music for mushrooms.
Yeah. We thought the time slot we learned some lessons on programming. It wasn't up to us, but they put me at the very, 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 very end.
Even after the closing of the ceremony.
Right. It was a 5-day event or 4?
4.
And it was the very, very last thing. And I kind of forgot, it's been a while. And I was like, oh yeah, this is always better in the dark. It really is. And I think it's a special energy that just, if you're trying to go inward.
You were Monday at 11 a.m.
And it was over, too. And, like, half the people had to leave already or were leaving to catch a plane. And I could tell they were kind of tired. And we had a lot of talking and ceremony all weekend. And as soon as I started, I just felt this wave of, like, no one needs me to walk them through more ceremony in this moment, yet that's kind of the whole point of it for me. And I could just feel the fatigue. And I was like, I almost want to be, I'm sorry. He's like, let's just relax and I'll play, which is kind of the energy I ended up going with.
You had a number of folks that were really into it and fully with you, but
Yeah.
it's true that the energy by that point was quite dissipated.
Sure, it's end of a long weekend.
Though,
Yeah.
and I have had the great good blessing boon of my life to be with you for most of your ceremony concerts, and it's been a while since
Yeah.
I've got to be a part of that with you. And there was a moment personally in it during Please Pass the Bliss with Ram Dass where he was speaking and the music was there, and it just felt, I just cracked wide open. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Like I had this meta big experience of the gift that you are for Ram Dass's voice, because it felt like he was then part of the Enthea wheel. Like he was a presence in that weekend, and his voice wanted to be there, and it was. And I just was so beautiful. It was so profound.
Well, I'm the one receiving the gift, no doubt. I mean, I can't tell you what an honor it is to be able to transmit and carry his voice, be a carrier of his wisdom, and then press the buttons where I start hearing it come through these big, loud subsystems. And I'm like, wow, what a trip. What a trip. It's like remembering like sitting there and like asking a question and basically, and him knowing and me telling him, he's like, I'm going to take this and then take it out to the world, and then doing it in a live space is a trip.
It brings him alive. When he says, I love you all, I feel him saying, and I love you all. Like the love that is there is so complete in presence. It just cracks my heart wide open.
It feels alive. And
So
it feels alive now, and that's very much so. Very much so. And I think that's why, because it's actively like being moved and affected into the world. And so it feels like this living, breathing thing that So that was nice to be able to bring that into the space and into that larger ceremony of the weekend. And I guess they're making some kind of digital offering, whether it's an e-course, it remains to be seen, but probably sections of this, including that performance, will be able to be shared. So keep you updated whenever that happens.
Yeah, and I was there teaching somatic body practices for prep and for being on the journey and for integrating posts. And I felt like there was a lot more that I could have shared live.
Yeah,
in the
for sure.
in the time that we were there. But I look forward to sharing a lot more about that.
Yeah. You've been doing a lot of work on that in the real world and a lot of interest in it now to go deeper and study it more. And there seems to be a lot there for people to be able to really get to the core of a lot of the things going on for people in their healing.
Yeah, the body's the gateway.
I feel like a test subject, so I certainly had my own big healing.
You're so lucky, and I'm so lucky. You're so lucky.
Indeed, I am. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on that weekend, or anything else?
No, I feel good for now. I just want to congratulate the whole Esalen production team for pulling off all the media and the live streaming. I know the work that I think it was Peter and Nirvan and Anastasia and Christine.
Wow,
and
you're
Steve.
amazing with names.
They were all doing was just
They pulled off the
incredible.
impossible, pretty much.
Did. So big props to you guys.
Esalen is known, at least in the past, for like, you basically can't use your email when you're there because the internet's so bad.
I couldn't get text messages or emails the whole time.
Which is was kind of the point in the past. And somehow they were like virtually streaming in people like James Fadiman or Paul Stamets, and it 90% of the time, 95% of the time worked. And the fact that it worked at all.
Yes.
And then that was being live streamed to a virtual audience. I was like, I cannot believe this is happening right now at Esalen.
Yeah.
So hats off.
Totally. Yeah. Congratulations. And congrats again to Dream and to Alan, who supports her as well, and everybody for having a dream.
Yeah.
bringing it into fruition, bringing it into life.
Yeah, it was a big lift. So congrats to them for pulling it off. And for us, we'll probably be hosting some kind of retreats there this year. We're just trying to figure out the when and all that stuff. So stay tuned to that. And Dream will maybe be doing, I'm sure, another Entheo wheel there. And so stay tuned for those kind of things. If you're interested, it will probably be virtual, I would guess, and in person again. So opportunities to get engaged firsthand. And yeah, that's the state of the state for now.
Yeah. Thanks again, hon.
All right. Well, keep walking, folks. We will catch you next time. Well, thanks, Radha, Marissa Radha Wepner, MarissaRadha.com. You can see those links in the show notes. She's got a whole world of, she's got yoga instruction videos and guided meditations. There's an album of hers that I did the music for on Spotify, wherever you listen to music. That's called Guidance. So check that out. It's got some beautiful guided meditations. It's got teacher training that you can even do remotely, life coaching. She's a DJ, among many other talents and skills. So check her out, Marissa Radha. This song you're hearing in the background is Undying. Just giving you another chance if you didn't hear last week's episode with Ronan of Field Trip, where we featured it there as well. And we gave this song in advance to everyone on the Patreon at the East Forest Council on Patreon, patreon.com/East Forest. But thank you to everyone who supports the podcast, and thank you for saying hi on the socials and so forth. That's East Forest and East Forest Music are our taglines. Blah, blah, blah. I'm staring at some beautiful, beautiful ancient sand dunes that have now become slick rock hills, and it just reminds me that all this stuff, you know, it's as important as we make it, but really, the work is done in our own hearts, and we're just doing the best we can do. But keep diving in, because, that North Star is in there, and you need to choose it. And I think you're needed right now. We're all needed to step through this needle that our civilization is transitioning through. And it's a big one, a multi-generational shift we're going through. And more than anything, if you're just trying to find something to put your feet on, put it on your heart, put it on some presence. And we can start there for it to guide you to a place of community and service and well-being, and doing what you can do and doing the best you can do. But being true to yourself about what really is that North Star for you. Sometimes we lose our way. Sometimes there's a fog, or sometimes we have what we might call false stars. But come around. I have to trust in the soul's journey. But your job is to show up and to keep diving in, and to keep questioning everything. On that note, keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. I'll catch you next week. When you do take shit, do it with grace. Peace and love, friends.